Stop for a moment. Not to think about your day or your schedule or whatever is waiting for you after this. Just stop and feel the specific quality of this moment in history. Something is ending. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet, unstoppable certainty of a tide going out before a wave arrives. The world you grew up in, the one you learned to navigate, to understand, to find your place inside, is living on borrowed time. And most people won't realize it until the moment has already passed. We've been told all our lives that change is gradual, that civilizations shift slowly, that we'll see the big transitions coming from a distance and have time to prepare. But that's not actually how history works. Most people stop thinking just before that point. They get close, sense the discomfort ahead, and turn back towards something more manageable. They tell themselves they've thought it through. They haven't. They've thought up to the edge and retreated, and called the retreat wisdom. Today we're going to walk past that edge, not to be provocative, not to perform intellectual courage, but because the questions that live on the other side of that discomfort are the ones that actually matter. And because the number of people willing to ask them honestly may determine the shape of the world we're all about to inhabit. The comfortable story and what it costs. Every society tells itself a story about how it works. Not an explicit story, not one written down anywhere and debated openly, but a background narrative so pervasive and so consistently reinforced that most people inside it never consciously register that it's a story at all. It simply feels like reality. The dominant story of modern societies, particularly in the industrialized world, goes roughly like this. We live in systems that, for all their imperfections, broadly reward merit, roughly reflect the preferences of the people inside them, and are gradually improving through the accumulated efforts of well-intentioned individuals and institutions. Progress is real. Problems are real but solvable. The future will be better than the present, more or less, if we keep doing roughly what we're doing. This story is not entirely false. There are elements of it that reflect genuine truths. Progress is real in many domains. Many institutions do reflect genuine effort toward genuine goods. The picture isn't uniformly dark. But the story, taken as a whole, is profoundly incomplete. And its incompleteness is not accidental. The gaps in it serve specific interests, and those interests have considerable resources devoted to keeping the gaps invisible. Understanding which parts of the story are missing and why is the beginning of actually understanding how the world works. The 1% who truly grasp this aren't cynics. They're not conspiracy theorists, not nihilists, not people who've concluded that nothing matters because everything is corrupt. There's something more difficult to categorize and more genuinely threatening to the systems they've come to understand. There are people who see clearly, who refuse comfortable simplifications, and who have developed the rare capacity to hold complex, uncomfortable truth without needing to immediately convert it into something more manageable. The first truth: systems are not designed to serve you. The first thing that most people never fully allow themselves to understand is this. The large systems that shape their daily lives, economic systems, political systems, media systems, educational systems, were not primarily designed with their well-being in mind, and do not primarily operate with their well-being as their central objective. This sounds harsh, stated that plainly. It sounds like the beginning of a cynical worldview that leads nowhere useful. But follow it carefully, because what it actually reveals is more nuanced and more important than a simple claim that everything is corrupt. Systems develop according to incentives. The incentives built into a system determine what the system rewards, what it amplifies, what it produces more of. A system built primarily around the incentive of profit will, over time, reliably produce more of whatever generates profit, regardless of whether that thing is also beneficial to the people the system claims to serve, and sometimes in direct conflict with their interests. This isn't a moral judgment about the people inside those systems. Most of them are not malicious. Most of them are doing what the systems around them reward, which is exactly what people in systems tend to do. The problem is structural, not personal, and that makes it considerably harder to address, because it can't be solved simply by replacing bad actors with good ones. Take media systems. A news organization operating inside an attention economy, one where revenue is tied to the quantity of attention it captures rather than the quality of understanding it produces, will reliably, over time, optimize for content that captures attention. Attention is captured most reliably, not by nuanced, accurate, contextually rich information, but by content that provokes strong emotional reactions. Fear, outrage, tribal identification, the pleasurable certainty of having confirmed what you already believed. Not because the people producing that content are evil, but because that's what the incentive structure rewards. And incentive structures shape behavior reliably and at scale. Understanding this doesn't mean distrusting everything. It means developing a much more precise and honest relationship with the question, what incentives shape this source of information, this institution, this system, and what does that mean for what it's likely to be telling me, and why? Most people never ask that question with genuine seriousness. It's uncomfortable because the answer often requires revising beliefs that have been held for a long time and that feel like part of who you are. But the people who do ask it and who sit with the answers honestly are operating inside a fundamentally clearer picture of reality. The second truth: attention is the resource being harvested. The second thing that very few people truly understand, not just intellectually, but in a way that changes how they actually move through the world, is the nature and scale of the competition for their attention. Your attention is the most valuable resource you possess. Not your money, not your labor, not your data in the abstract sense people usually mean when they talk about privacy. Your attention, the direction and quality of your conscious awareness from moment to moment, is what determines what you understand, what you want, what you fear, who you trust, and ultimately what choices you make. Whoever influences the direction of your attention influences your life in the most direct and fundamental sense possible. There are systems, extraordinarily sophisticated, extraordinarily well-resourced systems, whose primary business is the capture and direction of human attention. Social media platforms, streaming services, news organizations operating inside the attention economy, gaming platforms, advertising ecosystems that span all of the above. These systems employ some of the most talented engineers, psychologists, behavioral scientists, and data analysts in the world, all focused on a single core objective: getting your attention, keeping it, and directing it in ways that serve the system's interests. These systems know more about your psychological vulnerabilities than you do. They have processed the behavioral data of billions of people and identified with extraordinary precision which kinds of content trigger which emotional responses in which kinds of people, and how to sequence that content to maximize the time a person spends inside the system before their attention drifts elsewhere. This is not a background feature of modern life. It is the central economic engine of some of the largest and most powerful organizations in human history. And most people engage with these systems every single day for hours, under the comfortable illusion that they are simply choosing what they want to look at. The 1% who truly understand this don't necessarily refuse to use these platforms, but they use them with a fundamentally different quality of awareness. They maintain some portion of their attention as genuinely their own, directed by their own values and questions, not by what an algorithm has determined will most effectively hold them in place. That difference, maintained consistently over time, produces a radically different relationship to information, to reality, and to their own minds. A moment to stop. I want to pause here and ask you something honestly. In an average day, how much of your attention goes where you actually intend it to go? Toward things you've chosen because they reflect your genuine values and questions, versus where it gets directed by systems optimized to capture and hold it? This is a genuinely difficult question to answer, partly because the systems in question are specifically designed to make their influence feel like your own choice. But if you've ever picked up your phone without quite knowing why, or spent an hour reading things that left you feeling vaguely worse than before, or noticed that your sense of what matters seemed to be shifting toward whatever topics dominated your feed that week, you've felt the shape of this even if you haven't named it. Share in the comments. When did you first notice this? What made it visible to you? Your answer might help someone else begin to see it. The third truth. Most conflict is manufactured. The third thing that the 1% understand, and that most people never examine clearly, is how much of the social conflict that feels urgent and real and deeply personal is at some structural level produced and amplified by systems that benefit from it. Conflict is extraordinarily good for capturing attention. The human brain is wired, for very good evolutionary reasons, to pay more attention to threats and disagreements than to stability and agreement. A headline that tells you that people who disagree with you politically are not just wrong, but dangerous, morally corrupt, threatening everything you care about, captures and holds attention far more effectively than a headline that presents a genuinely nuanced account of a complicated situation. This means that systems competing for attention have a structural incentive to produce and amplify conflict, to make ordinary disagreements feel like existential battles, to portray the people on the other side of any divide as not merely mistaken, but contemptible. Not because conflict is necessarily false. Real disagreements exist, real injustices exist, real threats exist, but because the systems amplifying those conflicts are selecting for the most emotionally activating version of every story, which is almost never the most accurate or most useful version. The result is a population that feels more divided, more threatened, more certain of its own side and contemptuous of the other than the actual distribution of opinion and values in that population would justify. People who might, in direct personal encounter, discover more common ground than they expected, instead exist inside algorithmically curated information environments that continually confirm and deepen their sense that the other side is unreachable, incomprehensible, and dangerous. This serves the systems producing it. It does not serve the people caught inside it. And most people never step back far enough from the immediate emotional experience of the conflict to notice that the intensity of what they're feeling might be, at least partly, a product of systems that profit from that intensity rather than a direct and proportionate response to the actual state of the world. The fourth truth: intelligence is not the same as understanding. Here is perhaps the most confronting of the things that only a small fraction of people truly grasp. Raw intelligence, the capacity to process information quickly, to construct arguments, to perform well inside structured cognitive tasks, has almost no reliable relationship to genuine understanding of how the world works. In fact, high intelligence combined with motivated reasoning, the unconscious tendency to use cognitive capacity to defend conclusions we've already reached emotionally rather than to genuinely examine them, can produce something considerably more dangerous than ordinary confusion. It produces a person who is extremely good at constructing sophisticated justifications for beliefs they hold for reasons that have nothing to do with careful analysis, and who is therefore much harder to reach than someone who is simply uninformed. This is not a comfortable thing to sit with, because most people who are engaged enough to be thinking about these questions are also intelligent enough that this pattern applies to them. It applies to all of us, in different domains and to different degrees. The question is not whether we engage in motivated reasoning. We do. But whether we've developed enough honest self-awareness to notice when we're doing it and to make genuine efforts to examine rather than simply defend our existing conclusions. Genuine understanding requires something that intelligence alone doesn't provide: the willingness to genuinely consider that you might be wrong about things that feel important to who you are. That willingness is rare because it's genuinely costly. It requires tolerating real uncertainty about things that our psychological need for coherence and identity pushes us to treat as settled. It requires the capacity to hold two competing ideas simultaneously without immediately resolving the tension in favor of the one we already believed. The people who do this consistently, who have made a genuine practice of following evidence wherever it leads, rather than stopping where it becomes uncomfortable, are operating inside a fundamentally different relationship to knowledge than the rest. And paradoxically, the clearest marker of that relationship is not certainty, but its opposite: a comfortable, grounded relationship with not knowing, combined with clear principles for how to reason carefully in the presence of uncertainty. Why this frightens the rest? So why does this kind of understanding frighten people? Why do the vast majority of people spend their lives carefully not looking at these things directly, even when the information is available, even when some part of them senses that something important is being avoided? The answer is that genuine understanding of how systems work, combined with honest self-examination, makes certain comfortable positions impossible to maintain. It makes it impossible to fully outsource your thinking to any authority, political, religious, media, or social, without maintaining some independent capacity to evaluate what that authority is telling you and why. It makes it impossible to consume media or engage with social platforms without some awareness of the ways those systems are designed to influence you. It makes it impossible to participate in tribal social conflict with the kind of wholehearted certainty that makes the conflict feel meaningful and your side feel fully righteous. In short, it makes the world more complicated to live in, at least in the short term. The comfortable simplifications that make daily navigation easier are no longer quite available. The emotional rewards of tribal certainty are harder to access. The reassurance of simply trusting that the institutions around you have your interests at heart becomes impossible to maintain without qualification. What replaces these losses is something harder to describe, but more genuinely valuable. A relationship with reality that is actually real. A capacity for thought that is actually yours. A set of values and conclusions that have been actually examined rather than simply absorbed. And the quality of relationship with other people, freed from the distortions of manufactured conflict and tribal performance, that is capable of genuine depth. This is why the 1% who truly understand are not, in general, more anxious or more miserable than those who don't. They are often, over time, more grounded. The discomfort of clear sight is real but finite. The chronic low-level anxiety of sensing that something important is being avoided but never quite looking at it directly is its own kind of suffering, and it doesn't end. What comes next? The question that follows from all of this is both simple and genuinely difficult. What do you actually do with this kind of understanding? The answer isn't withdrawal. It isn't a pose of world-weary detachment or a performance of knowing better than everyone around you. Both of those are just different ways of avoiding genuine engagement with the complexity of being human in the world as it actually is. The answer is something closer to what some philosophers have called conscious participation. Engaging fully with life, with relationships, with work, with civic existence, while maintaining the quality of awareness that keeps you from being simply consumed by whatever current is strongest. Caring deeply about things that are genuinely worth caring about, while retaining enough perspective to distinguish those things from the things you've been encouraged to care about for reasons that serve someone else's interests. It means developing the habit of asking about any strong feeling or strong belief. Where did this come from? What does the system producing this want me to do with it? Is this actually my own assessment? Or am I experiencing the output of someone else's optimization process? It means being willing to sit with questions longer than is comfortable and to hold tentative conclusions loosely enough that new evidence can actually change them. And it means extending some of that same openness toward the people around you, recognizing that most of them are caught inside the same systems, responding to the same incentives, and would, given a different information environment and a different quality of conversation, quite possibly reach very different conclusions than the ones they currently hold. The 1% who truly understand this aren't separate from the rest of humanity. They are people who, somewhere along the way, decided to look at something most people avoid and found that the looking, however uncomfortable at first, was worth it. That the world on the other side of honest examination, while more complex, was also more real, and that a life lived inside genuine understanding, however demanding, is a fundamentally different thing from a life lived inside a comfortable story that was never quite true. That choice is available to anyone willing to make it. Not the 1% who were born with some special capacity for it. The 1% who decided to look. If this found you at a moment when you're ready to look, subscribe and come back. This is the kind of conversation worth continuing. The most significant transformations in human experience tend to arrive not as loud announcements, but as quiet accumulations. Dozens of small changes that seem manageable in isolation until the day they converge into something no one can any longer pretend is normal. That day is closer than most people think. This isn't speculation dressed up as prophecy. It's a pattern that repeats across the full length of human history. And right now, for the first time in centuries, multiple fundamental forces are shifting simultaneously. The question isn't whether the world you know is changing. It's whether you understand clearly enough what's actually happening to make real choices inside it, or whether you'll simply wake up one day inside a world that arrived without your permission. We've been here before, but never quite like this. To understand what's coming, we need to understand what's already passed. Humanity has lived through genuine civilizational turning points before. Moments when the basic rules of existence rewrote themselves so completely that people on opposite sides of the threshold could barely comprehend each other's lives. The agricultural revolution, roughly 10 to 12,000 years ago, was one such moment. Before it, human beings lived as nomadic foragers, small mobile groups following food across landscapes, carrying everything they owned, answering to the immediate demands of survival. After it, people settled. They built permanent structures, accumulated possessions, developed hierarchies, created the earliest forms of what we'd eventually call states and economies and religions. The world before that threshold and the world after it were not different versions of the same thing. They were different things entirely. The Industrial Revolution, beginning in the 18th century, was another such threshold. Before it, the overwhelming majority of human beings worked with their hands, lived where they were born, and organized their lives around cycles of season and community that had remained essentially unchanged for millennia. After it, people poured into cities, worked inside machines rather than alongside animals, and found themselves inside economic and social structures that their grandparents would have found completely incomprehensible. Each of these transformations shared a specific pattern. First, the changes seemed merely technical: new tools, new methods, modest improvements on what already existed. Then, gradually but irreversibly, those technical changes began hollowing out the deeper structures of daily life. How people worked, where they lived, who they loved, what they believed, and what they understood themselves to be. By the time most people recognized what had happened, they were already living inside the new world. The old one was gone. We are inside that same pattern right now, and we are closer to the threshold than most people are prepared to admit. The three forces converging. What makes this moment different from ordinary periods of change, what makes it genuinely comparable to the agricultural and industrial revolutions, rather than just another decade of technological progress, is that three separate fundamental forces are shifting at the same time. Each one alone would be enough to reshape the world significantly. Together, they are creating a convergence that points to a specific period, the years we are living through right now and the ones immediately ahead, as the actual turning point. The first is the transfer of cognitive authority from human minds to algorithmic systems. The second is the dissolution of the boundary between real experience and synthetic experience. The third is the beginning of the end of individual cognitive isolation, the earliest stages of minds connecting to other minds and to external systems in ways that go beyond anything a smartphone or a screen can offer. Let's take each one seriously, because each one deserves more than a headline. When machines start making the decisions. Right now, at this exact moment, algorithms are making consequential decisions about your life. What information reaches you? What opportunities surface in front of you? What risks you're assessed as carrying? In many countries, algorithmic systems are already involved in decisions about who gets a loan, who gets flagged for additional scrutiny at a border, who gets shortlisted for a job interview, and which neighborhoods receive which resources. Most people experience this as a background hum, mildly annoying when it's visible, invisible the rest of the time. But the scale and depth of this transfer is accelerating rapidly. The systems making these assessments are becoming more capable, more integrated into more domains, and more trusted, or at least more relied upon by the institutions that deploy them. The question this raises isn't simply a technical one, it's a philosophical one, and it's urgent. What happens to human agency